So we're in a series in Exodus. About a year ago, just over a year ago, I think Oz took us through a series looking at the first half of Exodus, the story essentially of the people of Israel being freed from slavery in Egypt and that story. And we've come back to finish off looking at Exodus, and we're going through quite quickly, pulling out chunks and ideas. But there's a theme. As you can see on the slide, today the theme is holy people, and each week it's sort of holy this or holy that. So kind of like the overarching theme is holiness. That's what we're thinking about. And so today we're thinking about holy people. What does it mean to be a holy people? What do you think holiness is? If you said to someone, well, so-and-so, they're very holy, what would that mean to you? Would it mean they're just well-behaved, they're polite, they're nice, they've got a bit of a glow around them? You know, in a dark room, you can always see them because they've got that holiness aura. Well, holiness actually just means, holy just means set apart. It means different. It means distinct. So when God says, you are to be a holy people, what he's saying is, I want you to be different. I want you to be distinct and set apart from the nations around you. And this is why God gave the people of Israel a law. He gave them the law so that they would live differently. They'd be distinct from the other nations around them. It was not unusual for the nations in the ancient Near East at this time to have rules and regulations, to have a code of laws, to have religious sort of orders. Other nations had that. It was not the fact that Israel had a law that made them unique. What made them unique, what made them holy, was the content of the law, the things they were being asked to do. So in the passage we read today, one of the examples in chapter 22, verse 31, is God actually says, because you are a holy people, you are to be my holy people, and because of that, do not eat the flesh of an animal torn by wild beasts. Which seems, maybe you don't think so, I think so. It seems a bit of an odd thing, doesn't it, to sort of say, look, you're different, you're set apart, so don't eat the flesh of animals that you stumble across in the wilderness that have been torn by wild beasts. But I think just the fact that God says, do this because you are different, we can imply from that this was perhaps something that was a fairly common practice, which makes sense. You know, people would wander in the desert, you see a carcass of an animal that's been killed by a wild beast and they've left it behind, and you think, great. You know, because life's hard. There's no supermarkets in the ancient Near East. So, you know, there's food. But God says, no, you're not to do that. You're different. So you leave that wild animal. He says, in fact, he says, throw it to the dogs. Leave it to the dogs. And because dogs was kind of a Jewish slang word for Gentiles, it's possible that what's being said here is, that's what the Gentiles do. You let them have the food they find, the dead animals they find in the wilderness. You're not to do that because you are holy. You are different. You are set apart. So is that what it means to be holy? You know, you're out one evening, you're walking along by the road, you see some roadkill, and your natural thought is, that's dinner taken care of. But you remember, no, I'm holy. I'm a holy person. So I'll leave that there. I won't eat that. Is that what it means to be holy? Well, in fact, in this day and age, you know, sort of scraping hedgehogs off the side of the road is not a very common thing to do. It's not what people do. And you would be different and set apart and distinct if you went around eating sort of dead animals you found in the wilderness. So that throws up the question, what does holiness mean? What does it mean for us to be a holy people in this day and age, in our time and culture? How can we be a holy people? Because for the people of Israel, for Jews, they've been given a law by God to make them distinct. And over the centuries, rabbis and scholars have put a lot of work into sort of unpacking and looking at the law and making it so that it applies. You can, as an observant Jew today, you can still follow the law, and that's how you are distinct. That's how you are holy and set apart. But we are not, most of us, I would imagine, if not all of us, we're not observant Jews. And in fact, the early church put a lot of work into saying, look, if you are not Jews, you are not to keep the law. The law is not for you. So what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to be a holy people? Well, again, the New Testament repeatedly says, yes, the people of God, Christians, the church, we are still to be holy people. Peter, in his first letter, in chapter 1, says, just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. In chapter 2, he reaffirms this message, this calling in Exodus. You are to be a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Paul says to the Thessalonians in chapter 4, he says, God did not call you to be impure. He called you to live a holy life. In Hebrews 12, verse 14, the author of Hebrews says, make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. So he's kind of bringing up the problem, isn't it? You've got to live in a way that you don't antagonize and upset and are troublemakers, but at the same time, you still need to be holy. You still need to be different. You still need to be distinct and set apart. So we are still called to be a holy people, but we have not been given a set of laws and rules and regulations that make us different from the people around us. So what is holiness? How do we be a holy people? Do we just have to live differently? Is that what holiness means? Just being different? Well, in one sense, I suppose it is. The question is, if you were today arrested for being a Christian and put on trial, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Is your life different enough that if your life was examined, they would say, yeah, this is someone who is different. This someone is set apart. There's enough evidence in this person's life that they are a follower of Jesus. The temptation then is to just think, well, that's what holiness is. Just being different. Just living a different kind of life. The temptation is to say, well, here I am on a Sunday morning, here in the college, at Barton Church. Loads of people aren't. Loads of people are in bed or doing other things or having fun. I'm doing this. This is different. So I'm holy because I'm doing this thing that's different from the world around me. It's tempting to say, well, I watch different things on television. I use different language to most of the people I work with or I'm with. So that makes me holy. That makes me different. Makes me set apart. But the truth is, there are lots and lots of people who are just different. There are lots and lots of people who just live differently to the world around them or to most people. For religious reasons, but also just for moral or political or cultural convictions. Is that holiness? Is that the holiness that the New Testament is talking about, is calling us to be? Many of you will know about the Amish group in America who live very different lives, who withdraw, who say we won't have technology after a certain period in history, so no electricity, nothing like that. That's very different. They're set apart, sort of very literally. But is that the holiness that the New Testament is calling us to? In my house, a couple of members of my family, not me, I must admit, but a couple of members of my family are very fond of a TV, or at least were very fond of a TV show called New Lives in the Wild with Ben Fogle. If you know Ben Fogle, and every episode he would go and visit a family or a couple or a person who had chosen to start a new life in the wild. They sort of move out to the darkest corner of Wales or somewhere like that, or maybe a lovely sunny, perpetually sunny island off the coast of Africa or something like this. And they would they say, we want to live differently to the world around us. They'd take their children out of school and they'd live very different lifestyles to the lifestyles that you and I might live. Very different. But is that holiness? Is that what it means to be holy? To be set apart the way God wants us to be set apart. Some churches, some Christians, some parachurch organisations have very, very strict rules about how you should behave, how you should dress, what you should and shouldn't do on certain days. Is that what Peter means when he says, be holy like the one who called you is holy? Be holy like God is holy. Be holy like Jesus is holy. Real holiness, real set-apartness, I think is about more than just behaving differently. It's about more than just behaving differently to the people around us. In fact, Paul tells Timothy, in his second letter to Timothy, chapter 3, he says, look, watch out, be aware, there are people who have the appearance of godliness, but deny its power. So Paul's well aware it is possible to have the appearance of godliness, the appearance of holiness, the appearance of being different and set apart, but yet to not truly be holy, to not truly be holy as God calls us to be holy. It's possible to be set apart from the world and yet not be living in the holiness that God has called us to live. It's not just a matter of how you look. It's not just a matter of your external behavior. It's not a matter of having certain rules and regulations. That's not holiness as God calls us to be holy. I want you to imagine for the moment that you are standing and you're looking at two statues. Doesn't matter what the statues are of, but you're looking at them from a bit of a distance and they are identical. They're shining, they're gold, glinting in the sunlight. And you get closer to the statues. They look identical down to the smallest detail. You get closer and closer. They look the same. You reach out and touch one. They feel the same. They smell the same. They are identical to all intents and purposes. But then out of your pocket, you pull a tool of some kind, a knife or something like that. And you go to one statue and you just scratch it and you scrape off a thin layer of gold, peels off. You scratch and where you've just scratched, more gold. Scratch again, more gold, just thin layers of gold. Then you go to the other statue, identical. You scratch it with your tool, thin layer of gold, and then immediately underneath you see the dull grey of iron. And you realize one of these statues is made of gold. One of them just has the appearance of gold. It's just iron with gold paint or a gold layer over the top of it. God calls us to be holy all the way through, to our core, not just on the outside. This is one of the things Jesus criticizes the Pharisees for in Matthew 23. He says, you have an external holiness, a holiness that looks all right from a distance. He says, you are whitewashed tombs. From the outside, you're all shiny and spick and span, but inside you are full of dead bones and corruption. This is the message of the gospel, that God transforms us from the inside out. We are not just washed clean of our sin and our dirtiness and our failures on the outside. We are made completely new from the inside out, hearts and all. The holiness we are called to live begins in here. It starts here. And Paul says, he told the church in Corinth, church mostly made up of sort of Gentiles, non-Jews, he says, you need to perfect your holiness. You need to work at it. It is something that you need to develop in yourself. And as a holy people, we need to perfect the holiness that starts from in here. And how do we do this? Well, good old Paul, full of good advice is Paul. He tells us, he says in Romans 12, be transformed by the renewing of what? By the renewing of your behavior? No. by the renewing of your mind. By the renewing of your mind. Shallow, artificial holiness, the gold paint over the iron. Just ask one question. What do I do? What do I do? Just tell me what to do. Real holiness begins when we ask a different question. Why? Why do you want me to live this way, God? What's going on beneath the surface? Why am I behaving this way? Because real holiness is not just a matter of behaving differently. Real holiness is about thinking differently. Real holiness is not about living a life that's different to the world around you. It's about thinking differently to the world that's around you. It's about having different values to the world around you. That's where being a holy people begins. That's where it starts from. Real set-apartness comes from seeing the world through a different lens to the rest of the people around you. The code of laws and regulations that other nations had said, look, this is what you should do. Why? Because it makes society work. It keeps law and order. It stops things from falling apart. It maintains the status quo. And that's why they existed. That was their justification. But if you look through Exodus, if you look through the Old Testament and the laws that God gives his people, there is a current that runs through them of you are doing this because you see the world differently to the nations around you. You are doing it because you are different people to the nations around you. You think differently. In verse 21 that we read today, and at the end, sort of 23 verse 9, do not ill-treat an alien or a foreigner. Do not oppress a foreigner. Why? Because they're a valuable part of our workforce. In fact, they're the majority of our workforce. We need to look after them, keep them happy. It makes life run smoothly. No, because you were once foreigners. Remember what your life was like before God saved you, before God rescued you. Remember and live according to that. In verse 22, do not take advantage of a widow or an orphan. Why? Because God says, look, because I pay attention to them, I care for them. And if you mistreat them and they call out to me, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. I care for those who are lowly and poor. Verse 26 and verse 27. If you take a neighbour's cloak as a pledge, give it back to them when the sun sets. Why? That doesn't seem very fair. What's the point of a pledge that I have to give back? That's not much of a commitment. Why? Because, says God, I am compassionate. That's why. Holiness is not just a matter of doing what the church tells you to do. It's not just a matter of doing what your sort of minister or your pastor tells you to do. You know, holiness is not even a matter of just doing what the Bible tells you to do. Holiness is a matter of knowing God and living out his values. Just reading the Bible and say, well, this is what I'm going to do. You know, I'm not going to eat animals I find by the side of the road because the Bible tells me to. That's a great way to have the appearance of godliness while denying its power. Because the power of the gospel is not just that Christ died to pay the price for our sins so that our failures can be forgiven. The power of the gospel is that Christ died so that we can know God like Christ knows God. We can think about God like Christ thought about God. We can live like Christ did, and we can do that now. That's the power of the gospel. Holiness is about living a radically different life because you are thinking radically differently to the world around you, because the Holy Spirit has transformed you into a radically different person. That's the gospel. That's the power of the gospel. Surface level holiness just says, look, just tell me how to live. I'll do that. Just tell me what I need to do. True holiness says, who is God? What's he done for me? How should I live because of those things? This is why I exist. This is who he has made me to be. And if all this is true, what should I do tomorrow? That's true holiness. It's the difference between saying, look, if I find an animal carcass left by wild animals, I'm not going to eat it. Why? Because I'm told not to do it. It's the difference between that and saying, if I find an animal carcass by the side of the road, I'm not going to eat it. Why? Because I'm not a wild animal. I am known and loved by God. I am one of his people, and he said he will provide for me and care for me. So why do I need to sort of scrounge and scrabble in the dirt for food? Because I am one of God's children. And if you think like that, then you will figure out what holiness looks like, what you need to do, how to be holy in a time and a culture where we don't sort of think much about what we do with animal carcasses we find by the side of the road. One of the things the early church did, we read in Acts, it says they made sure that none of their number was in material need. None of their number was in material need. How did they do that? In Acts 4, you can read it. They shared their possessions. They pooled everything they had. Those who had land sold it, gave the money to the apostles who distributed it to make sure that no one was in need. Why did they do that? Because the law told them to? No. If you read Acts 4, there's no sense that they're doing something because, well, God's told us this is how we're to live. They did it not because the law commanded it, because they said, look, if that's who God is, this is how we should live. If this is who God is, if this is what God has done for us, if this is what God tells us about how he thinks and what he thinks of people and how his people should live, what should we do? Well, let's do this. This is how we're going to live now. And you can't tell me that didn't set them apart from the people around them. In fact, all through the early church history, you read a repeated phrase, the nations looking at the church and saying, see how they love one another. Holiness, set apartness, being different, standing out. Just as an expression of a holy people trying to figure out how to live holy lives. And it didn't come because someone told them to do it. It came because they said, how can we live out God's values? That's the question that's behind holiness. That's the question that comes from in here. How can we live out God's values? That's how you find holiness as a holy people. How can we live out God's values? If God cares for widows and orphans, how should that influence the way I live and the decisions I make? If God is compassionate, what does that mean for how I act tomorrow morning? If God has great mercy and has shown it to not just to the people of Israel, but to me and to others, what am I doing to mirror God's mercy in this world? And if you think that way, your lives will just be different. Your lives will be holy. Your lives will be set apart and distinct. And it won't just be an appearance of holiness. People will scratch us and see that the gold isn't just surface level. It runs right to the core.